I never imagined that the quaint Victorian house on Willow Street would come to haunt my dreams and consume my waking hours. It started innocently enough, my search for the perfect home, one with character and history, not just the soulless cookie-cutter structures that line the streets of the city. Little did I know, my pursuit of a unique abode would lead me to a place where the past held more than just memories. The moment I set foot inside that house, I was enchanted. It stood tall and proud, its facade adorned with gingerbread trim and ornate carvings. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the hardwood floors. The realtor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, spoke of its rich history and original period features, as if she'd rehearsed the lines 100 times. "It's a real gem, this one," she said with a smile. "The last owners did some renovations, but they've kept the old-world charm intact." I was sold. The price seemed too good to be true, but I wasn't about to pass up on a dream house. I signed the paperwork, received the keys, and moved in within a week. My fascination with the house grew as I explored its nooks and crannies. There were hidden passages behind heavy bookshelves, trapdoors leading to unfinished basements, and secret compartments in the attic. It was as if the house had a story to tell, and it was determined to keep me engaged. One evening, as I wandered through the attic, I stumbled upon an old journal buried beneath a pile of dusty books. The leather cover was cracked with age, and its pages were brittle. I opened it carefully, revealing the meticulous handwriting of a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the house in the early 1900s. Eleanor wrote about her love for the house, her family, and her husband Samuel. The entries were filled with joy, but as I turned the pages, a darkness seeped in. Eleanor's words became frantic, her sentences disjointed. She wrote about hearing whispers in the night, doors slamming shut on their own, and seeing figures that weren't there. I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up my spine as I read her last entry. "I fear this house is no longer ours. It watches, it waits." That night, I couldn't sleep. Eleanor's words haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak, every rustle in the dark sent my heart racing. It was irrational, I told myself, but the unease persisted. Days turned into weeks, and the house's oddities began to manifest. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut with a deafening force, and chilling whispers echoed in the night. I couldn't deny it any longer. Something was terribly wrong with my dream house. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing all the candles. In the darkness, I heard a voice, a mournful, anguished wail that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice quivering. No response, only silence. The house's malevolence grew with each passing day. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, and the walls seemed to close in on me. I became a prisoner within the very walls that had once enchanted me. I searched for answers, digging through old archives and town records. What I found sent shivers down my spine. Samuel, Eleanor's husband, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been the subject of rumors and legends for generations. The townsfolk spoke of a malevolent presence that had plagued the house for over a century, a presence that lured in unsuspecting occupants and never let them go. I was just the latest in a long line of victims. I couldn't live like this any longer. The relentless torment, the ever-present fear, it was driving me to the brink of madness. Armed with knowledge from the past, I decided to confront whatever entity dwelled within the house. One night, as the house came alive with its eerie phenomena, I stood in the attic, clutching the journal I had found. "Eleanor," I called out, "I know you're here. I know what happened to you and Samuel. You can't keep tormenting me." The attic grew colder, and a whisper filled the air, a sad, longing voice. "You should leave, while you still can." I pressed on, my voice trembling. "I won't let this house control me. I won't be your prisoner." Suddenly, the room shook violently, as if the very foundations of the house were rebelling. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsating with an otherworldly force, but I held my ground. With a final, deafening roar, the house relented. The malevolent presence that had tormented me for so long began to recede. Shadows retreated, and the temperature returned to normal. The house had released its grip on me. I wasted no time. I packed my belongings and fled from Willow Street, never looking back. The house, with all its charm and history, had revealed its true nature, a place of darkness and despair, where the past held an iron grip on the present. To this day, I can't forget the horrors I endured in that house, or the tragic story of Eleanor and Samuel. I now live in a small apartment, far from the whispers of Willow Street. The experience has left me scarred, but it has also taught me that some dreams are better left unfulfilled, and some houses are best left unoccupied. The unseen tenant of that Victorian mansion will forever haunt my nightmares, a reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the ordinary world.
I had always dreamt of moving out of my cramped apartment and into a spacious, modern house. The moment I stumbled upon the listing for a sleek, minimalist home nestled at the edge of the city, I knew I had found my escape. It was a stunning 2-story house with large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. It felt like a dream come true. The landlord, Mr. Granger, was a friendly middle-aged man with a warm smile. He showed me around the house, explaining that it had been recently renovated. Everything appeared brand new, from the gleaming kitchen appliances to the pristine hardwood floors. There was only one strange condition. I was not allowed to enter the basement. He handed me the keys and said, "Enjoy your stay, but remember, the basement is off limits." I agreed and moved in without hesitation, eager to start this new chapter of my life. The first few days were idyllic. I reveled in the newfound space, arranging my furniture to my heart's content and basking in the silence of the serene neighborhood. However, as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle oddities. At night, I could hear faint whispering, like hushed conversations that floated through the air. I blamed it on the neighbors and the thin walls of the house. The sensation of being watched became increasingly pronounced. Whenever I entered a room, I would catch fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. They darted away, vanishing into thin air before I could get a good look. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a soft, eerie humming coming from the walls. It was a strange, otherworldly tune that sent shivers down my spine. I followed the sound to the living room, where it seemed to be emanating from a blank stretch of wall. I placed my ear against the wall and the humming grew louder. It was as if someone or something was on the other side. My heart raced as I realized there must be a hidden room in the house. The temptation to investigate was too strong to resist. Armed with a small toolkit, I began to remove the drywall, slowly revealing the hidden room. Inside, I found an unsettling sight. A small, windowless chamber filled with dusty old books, arcane symbols painted on the walls, and an ornate mirror that seemed out of place. As I examined the mirror, I noticed that my reflection was not alone. Behind me, in the dimly lit room, stood a shadowy figure. My blood ran cold as I turned to confront it, but the figure had vanished, leaving only a sense of foreboding in its wake. Over the following nights, the strange occurrences escalated. The whispering in the walls grew louder and more distinct, as if the voices were trying to communicate with me. I could hear snippets of conversations, but the words were in a language I couldn't understand. One night, as I lay in bed, the whispers reached a fevered pitch. It was as if a dozen voices were speaking at once, their words a chaotic jumble. I clutched my ears, trying to block out the cacophony, but it seemed to reverberate through my very bones. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront Mr. Granger about the bizarre happenings in the house. I found his address and drove to his residence, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. His home was an aging Victorian house, its exterior in stark contrast to my own modern dwelling. Mr. Granger greeted me with a warm smile, but his eyes betrayed a sense of unease as I recounted my experiences. "I'm sorry you're going through this," he said, his voice filled with sympathy. "But there's something you need to know about the house." He explained that the basement, the one place he had forbidden me to enter, was the source of the disturbances. The previous owner had conducted experiments in the occult, attempting to communicate with the spirit world. The experiments had gone horribly wrong, and the basement had become a conduit for restless souls. Reluctantly, I returned home, my mind in turmoil. As I stepped through the front door, the whispers in the walls grew louder, their words more insistent. It was as if the spirits were trying to communicate with me, to draw me into their world. I made my way to the basement, my heart pounding with dread. The door to the forbidden chamber stood before me, the knob cool to the touch. With a trembling hand, I turned it and entered the room. Inside, the air was thick with an oppressive presence, and the mirror on the wall seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. As I approached, I saw my own reflection, but it was distorted, as if seen through a veil of darkness. Suddenly, a voice whispered in my ear, a voice that was not my own. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, its words a sinister chant that sent chills down my spine. I tried to move, to escape the room, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from the mirror. As I watched in horror, the figure from before materialized in the mirror, its eyes empty and soulless. It reached out a hand, and I felt a searing pain as its icy fingers closed around my wrist. With a jolt, I was pulled into the mirror, into a world of darkness and despair. I was surrounded by shadowy figures, their forms twisted and tormented. They whispered in a chorus of voices, their words a symphony of agony. I knew then that I had become one of them, trapped in this nightmarish realm for eternity. The house had claimed me, just as it had claimed the souls of those who had come before me. As I looked back at the mirror, I saw my own reflection, but it was no longer me. It was a hollow, lifeless shell, forever imprisoned in the whispering walls of the house. And so, the house's dark secret remained hidden, waiting for its next unsuspecting tenant to unlock the door to the forbidden basement and become another lost soul in its malevolent grip.
It was a dark and stormy night when my childhood friend, Sarah, invited me to stay over at her family's remote cabin nestled deep within the woods. The cabin was a rustic getaway, far from the noise and chaos of the city. I eagerly accepted her invitation, looking forward to catching up and reliving old memories. As I drove through the dense forest, rain poured down in torrents, making the winding road treacherous. Tall trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the headlights of my car barely pierced the inky darkness. I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease as the cabin came into view, its wooden facade illuminated by a single porch light. Sarah greeted me with a warm hug at the door, and her family's faithful dog, Max, wagged his tail in welcome. The cabin was cozy, with a crackling fire in the hearth and a table set for dinner. Sarah's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were friendly and welcoming, and we chatted over a hearty meal. After dinner, we settled into the living room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the trees like a mournful lament. As the night wore on, the atmosphere inside the cabin began to change. A feeling of unease settled over me, and I noticed that Sarah and her parents seemed on edge as well. Their smiles had faded, replaced by anxious glances exchanged in hushed whispers. I couldn't understand what had caused this sudden shift in mood. It was Max, their usually affable dog, who first exhibited signs of distress. He began to growl and bark at the corners of the room, his fur bristling as he stared at something unseen. His behavior was so unnerving that Mr. Thompson decided to put him in a separate room to calm down. As the night wore on, the tension in the cabin continued to mount. I tried to make light conversation, but the atmosphere remained heavy, as if a storm of another kind was brewing inside the walls. Sarah's parents kept glancing at the clock, their expressions filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Finally, Mrs. Thompson stood up abruptly, her voice quivering as she addressed me. I'm so sorry, dear, but there's something you need to know. We didn't expect you to come tonight. I was taken aback. But Sarah invited me. I thought this was planned. Mrs. Thompson's eyes filled with sorrow. No, you don't understand. We weren't expecting you tonight. We were preparing for something else entirely. Sarah, tears in her eyes, chimed in. We tried to cancel your visit, but the storm cut off all communication. We didn't want you to get caught up in this. I was growing increasingly confused and anxious. Caught up in what? What's going on? Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, his face etched with worry. Tonight is the anniversary of the disappearance. As he spoke those words, a profound sense of dread washed over me. I had heard rumors about this cabin, about the eerie occurrences that took place on this fateful night every year. People whispered of strange lights in the woods, ghostly apparitions, and otherworldly sounds. Sarah continued, her voice trembling. Every year, on this night, something supernatural happens. We don't know what it is, but it's not safe. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I realized the gravity of the situation. I was a guest in a place where something unexplainable was about to unfold, something that had driven my friend and her family to the brink of fear. I wanted to leave, to escape the cabin and the looming horror, but the storm outside was unrelenting, and the roads were impassable. With a sense of resignation, we huddled together in the living room, waiting for whatever was to come. The hours passed slowly, the silence only broken by the relentless rain and the occasional eerie creaking of the cabin's timbers. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed. I could feel a change in the air, a heavy presence that seemed to seep through the walls. Sarah's parents clutched each other, their faces pale with terror. Sarah herself was on the verge of tears. We waited, our breaths shallow and our hearts pounding, for the unknown to reveal itself. Then it began. The room grew frigid, and a soft, haunting melody filled the air. It was a mournful tune, like a dirge played on a violin, and it seemed to come from all around us, as if the very walls of the cabin were weeping. I turned to the window, and my blood ran cold. Outside, in the pouring rain, I saw a procession of figures, shadowy, translucent forms dressed in tattered clothes, their eyes hollow and their faces etched with suffering. They moved slowly, as if in a trance, their ghostly feet barely making a sound as they approached the cabin. I gasped, unable to tear my eyes away from the surreal spectacle. Sarah and her parents huddled closer together, their fear palpable. The apparitions drew nearer, and I could see their eyes, filled with a desperate longing. One of them, a young woman with matted hair and torn clothing, reached out a hand toward me. I could feel the coldness of her touch, like ice on my skin. She whispered in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the abyss. "Help us," she pleaded, her words a haunting refrain. "Free us from this eternal torment." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of the apparitions. They filled the room, their mournful cries drowning out all other sound. As the night wore on, I watched in horror as the spirits began to fade, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The room grew warmer, and the eerie melody gradually faded away. When the last of the apparitions had vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of sorrow, Sarah and her parents turned to me with tears in their eyes. They thanked me for enduring the night, for bearing witness to the supernatural phenomenon that had plagued their family for generations. As the storm outside began to subside, I realized that the cabin had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The clock had struck dawn, and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, dispelling the darkness that had hung over the cabin. I knew then that I had survived a night unlike any other. A night when the veil between the living and the dead had been lifted, revealing a world of anguish and torment. The memory of that eerie stayover at my friend's house would haunt me for the rest of my life, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of the unknown.
My girlfriend Emma and I had just moved into our first home together, a charming old house nestled at the edge of a peaceful neighborhood. We were thrilled at the prospect of building a life together in this cozy, picturesque place. Little did we know that our dream home would soon turn into a nightmare. The house was filled with character, from its creaky wooden floors to the ornate moldings around the windows. But one feature stood out: a peculiar, oversized, oval-shaped mirror hung in the bathroom, right above the sink and opposite the toilet. It was a beautiful, vintage piece, framed in intricate woodwork that seemed to whisper of forgotten times. On our first night in the house, I woke up in the middle of the night, the need to use the bathroom urgent. The moonlight filtered in through the curtains, casting an eerie glow on the hallway. As I entered the bathroom, I couldn't help but notice the reflection in the mirror. It was me standing there in my pajamas, pale and disheveled. But something was off. My reflection was not moving in sync with my movements. It stood there, perfectly still, as I moved about the bathroom. I blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the light, but my reflection remained motionless. Unease washed over me, but I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. Perhaps I was still half asleep, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I hurriedly finished in the bathroom and returned to bed, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Emma and I would hear faint whispers coming from the bathroom, even when we were certain no one else was in the house. We'd find the bathroom door open, despite having closed it securely. And sometimes, we'd catch a glimpse of movement in the mirror, a shadowy figure that seemed to move independently of us. One evening while I was taking a shower, I heard a soft voice coming from behind the bathroom door. It was a woman's voice, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I turned off the water and called out to Emma, thinking she might be playing a prank on me. But when I stepped out of the shower and opened the door, the bathroom was empty. Emma was nowhere to be found, and the rest of the house was eerily silent. I searched the entire house, my heart pounding with fear, but there was no sign of her. Panicked, I called the police and reported Emma missing. They arrived at the house and conducted a thorough search, but they found no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As the days turned into weeks, I became consumed by grief and desperation. I couldn't eat or sleep, haunted by the memory of that whispering voice in the bathroom. The mirror, with its peculiar oval shape and intricate woodwork, seemed to mock me, reflecting my anguish back at me. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, a soft, eerie melody filled the air. It was a haunting tune, like a music box playing a melancholic lullaby. The sound seemed to be coming from the bathroom. With trepidation, I approached the bathroom door and pushed it open. The melody grew louder, filling the room with a sense of foreboding. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, and the melody seemed to be emanating from the mirror. I stared at my reflection in the glass, my eyes filled with dread. My reflection was not alone. Behind me, in the dimly lit bathroom, stood a shadowy figure, a woman with long, flowing hair and eyes filled with sorrow. She reached out a hand toward me, her fingers pale and translucent. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, help me." I tried to move, to break free from the mirror's grasp. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from the haunting figure. The melody continued to play, its mournful notes echoing in my ears. As I watched in horror, the figure reached out of the mirror and touched my hand. I could feel the coldness of her touch, like ice on my skin. A surge of energy passed through me, and I was pulled into the mirror, into a world of darkness and despair. I found myself in a shadowy realm, surrounded by other figures. Apparitions trapped in the mirror's depths. Their eyes were empty, their faces contorted with anguish. They reached out to me with spectral hands, their voices a chorus of sorrow. The woman who had first spoken to me approached, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for setting us free," she whispered. I tried to respond, to tell her that I didn't belong in this nightmarish realm, but my words were lost in the void. The figures drew closer, their fingers cold and clammy as they reached for me. I woke up with a start, back in the bathroom of my own house, my body drenched in sweat. The mirror loomed in front of me, its oval shape and intricate woodwork as familiar as ever. But something had changed. I could feel a sense of peace in the room, as if a weight had been lifted. I rushed out of the bathroom and into the living room, my heart pounding with relief. Emma was there, sitting on the couch, her eyes filled with tears of joy. She had no memory of being missing, of the shadowy figures in the mirror, or of the haunting melody. As we held each other, I couldn't help but wonder if the mirror had been a portal to another world, a world of trapped souls and lost memories. I knew one thing for certain: I would never look into that mirror again, for fear of what I might find on the other side.